gang, I am Joe Edelman, and welcome to the Last Frame Live. Tonight, we're going to have a kind of casual night tonight. Since it's a Friday night last frame, I'm hoping that you've got some things you want to talk about, but I've got some things I want to share. So I'm going to share those with you, and we're going to get into a little lesson about backgrounds and lighting. And of course, I'll answer any questions that you have. So if you're watching live, drop me a note in the chat. You know the deal. Let me know who you are, where you're watching from. And if you're watching the replay, no sweat. Do me a solid. Leave a comment underneath the video. Let me know you were here and that you watched. Already, who do we got here? We got Lynn here from New York, Cooley out in Indiana. I got Calvin up in Maine, April out in Missouri, Daniel in Michigan. All of you, thanks for giving up part of your Friday evening, for being here. You are part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who have been tuning in weekly to check out The Last Frame. And for that, I appreciate you and will do my best to help you with your photography tonight. As always, remember, it will help other photographers find out about the show. If you do me a solid, hit that thumbs up. The more thumbs up, the more YouTube recommends the show to other photographers, and they can join us here. Okay, so again, I told you I'm not going to do all the news stuff in that. There was nothing like super exciting in the blogs this week, nothing that I think is really worth talking about. So let's just go ahead and mention one thing that I have coming up this Tuesday evening, May 9th. And look, I'm not going to give you a hard sell, but I'm going to tell you honestly, this is something that a lot of you could benefit from. It's one of my online programs. It's called No Rules Composition Techniques to Improve Your Photography. I'm sure if you follow me, you've heard me use my, rules of four-letter word evaluation many, many times, okay? Believe me, if you're a photographer who tries to run all of your photographs as you're taking them through that kind of filter, pun intended, of, am I using the rule of thirds? Do I have a Fibonacci spiral here? And all that kind of stuff, man, you're missing out. You're missing out because, number one, you're making it a lot harder to make a decent picture. And number two, you are, at best, making your images predictable and ultimately kind of boring. So this is going to break it down. And like everything I do, it's going to delve into a little bit of the psychology as to why this is such a big deal, why you should be ignoring the rules of composition. And of course, and that's a big statement to make, right? Ignore the rules of composition. Composition is very important. Right, so I'm not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but the point is I am also going to give you a solid breakdown of what I recommend for how you can go about creating great compositions for every shot that you make. And I'm going to share the criteria that I use, my actual methodology of doing it each and every time I shoot, no matter what I shoot. So I'll go ahead and I will share that link in the chat. I'll also make sure it gets added underneath the video. Again, that's coming up Tuesday night. It's only $10. There's a downloadable cheat sheet that you'll get after the presentation that's got all the tips and some other really cool, useful information about composition. And once you sign up, you will have access to watch the replay for 72 hours afterwards. So this presentation's on Tuesday. For those that sign up on Wednesday, they'll get the link and they'll have 72 hours from that point to watch it. So if for some reason you can't be there Tuesday, you can still partake in this. And it's worth mentioning, if you are a paid member of my Tog Knowledge community, you will be able to watch this after the fact at no cost. Obviously, you don't get to participate if you're not there live, but you also don't have to sign up and pay separately to be able to participate in this information and learn from it. Okay? All right. So that being said, let's dive in. I want to talk about something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Recently, one of the members of my Tog Knowledge community, Madeline, who's over in the UK, she asked a question and asked me if I would discuss backdrops, but specifically, how far should a subject be from the background, especially if the subject's moving around, like a dancer? So this was her question. And when I saw her question, you know, my first thought is, oh, that's something I can definitely talk about. But then I started to think about it and I realized it's like, wait a minute. We talk a lot about the different kinds of backgrounds and we talk about how to light backgrounds, but there's not a lot of conversation about what is the right background size. And for that matter, is there such a thing? So probably, or at least I hope it goes without saying that unfortunately there is no one perfect size background for every kind of photograph that you would take, right? There are certain sizes that are better suited for portraiture, certain sizes that are better suited for groups, certain sizes that are better suited for maybe shooting models, or in Madeline's case, dancers. But even then, there's a whole bunch of variables that come into play in terms of how do you figure out what's the best size. And you know, it's worth pointing out, that's one of the big challenges, and some of you have already figured this out. Those of you that maybe haven't bought any backgrounds yet or who aren't using a lot of backgrounds, you're going to learn this lesson the hard way, unfortunately. The challenge with backgrounds is once you buy it, once you invest your money into a background, and I don't care what kind of background it is, right? It doesn't matter if it's a paper seamless from Savage Universal. It doesn't matter if you invest a little bit more money and you go like with the X-Drop system from Westcott. If you buy a big muslin background, canvas, whatever. The challenge is once you have it, and once you've invested your money in it, how many times can you use it? How many different pictures can you put that background in before you have a serious situation of been there, done that, right? Now, you know, maybe you're going to go ahead and you're going to do like school portraits or something, in which case, yeah, you go photograph 1,000 people in that background, right? That's cool. But certainly you wouldn't want to have that background show up 1,000 times on your website or in your portfolio. That's not going to show a lot of depth. So one of the challenges that we always face as photographers, and this should be an important part of your consideration for, hey, I want to buy a background. What do I buy? How many different ways can you actually use that background? And also, how can you go about making that background look different from one picture to the next? So a lot of you are probably aware that my favorite background color is gray. I have a couple of videos on YouTube that are about the gray background, and that's simply because with a gray background, I can light it with colored gels and easily make it pretty much any color I want to make it by using gels. So the gray background is actually incredibly versatile, right? But tonight, we're going to talk about background size, right? How do you know what's the right size background to get? So I'm going to switch over here. We're going to work in the Satellite 3D software tonight, and I've got a little studio set up, put together. Since Madeline asked about dancers, we'll actually start with a dancer here, okay? And I'm going to begin at this perspective so that you can get a sense of just how tall this dancer is in relationship to the background. So now, what is important here so that we have kind of a set of reference points? Let me give you some of the details that we're working with. This particular background is 8 feet wide, right? So this would be, and the top of it is 8 feet tall. So 8 feet wide, 8 feet tall. In fact, here I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay. Yeah, we'll go to get that up there so it fills up the whole screen. There you go. So 8 feet wide, 8 feet tall. So this would be the equivalent of like the Westcott X-Drop Pro backgrounds. Okay. So just as an example, if you go with the seamless paper backdrops, you're looking at 9 foot widths, or I think it's 4 foot. They're just under 5 foot widths. Okay, that they come in, right? So it's kind of just a tiny bit wider, or you know, almost half this size, right? Westcott also makes a 5-foot wide version of their X Drop background. So they have the X Drop, that's 5 foot, and then the X Drop Pro, which is 8 feet. All right. So the model that I have put on this set, who I guess we shouldn't call her model, she's a dancer because that's what we're looking to do here, right? Let me just get her stats. She is 5'6" tall. Okay. And then, of course, she does have her arms up, which makes her a little bit taller. And I figured since she's a dancer, that's kind of important. So you can see if you look up above me, she's on her tippy toes, like a dancer would be. She's got her arms up, which is something that you would potentially encounter if you were a dancer. And I purposely have the top of the background at 8 feet. I went with that simply because for a lot of you, myself included, my ceiling height in my studio is 8 feet. So that's my max height, right? So it's not like I can go higher than that, right? So again, these are all variables that come into the equation, which is why there is no one size fits all. So you can already imagine if this dancer was going to be jumping, that's going to be problematic, right? Especially if we don't have an 8-foot ceiling height. If we have a higher ceiling, then certainly we can raise the background. But then when we raise the background, we also have to be aware that we need a longer base. If you want to photograph your dancer standing on the background, you'll notice this particular background is, where are we at here? 13 feet long. I went with that 13 because the Westcott X Drop, they have 8 by 13 feet version. So you notice if I want any depth between my subject and the background, that background's still not long enough, right? Ideally, I need it to be, I don't know, probably like 20 feet. Well, okay, not 20. We'll go 16. Yeah, 16. And now I could easily have a situation where my subject is completely on the background as long as she doesn't jump. Now let's talk about the optics here. Optics are important. So you'll notice the camera's back a decent ways. This is just a 50 millimeter lens. That's all. So I'm shooting with a 50 millimeter, and I also want you to notice if I hit this from the side again and we'll zoom in, the reason why I have the camera so low. This is important, especially if you work with a short lens, but honestly, with any dancer, this is kind of important. Notice that the camera, look at the camera body, it is parallel to the dancer's body. Boom, like so, right? If I had this camera up higher, kind of at my height, which is 5'8", right? So I'm not super tall. So if we go 5'8", where are we at? So we're going to go up around there, okay? In order to get her all in, I'm looking down on her. So it's almost eye to eye with her. And even if I come lower so that I'm kind of eye to eye, I still have to tilt the camera down. And with the 50 millimeter, look at how much shorter that makes her look, right? So what's important is to have the camera right about at the midpoint of her body so that it is not tilted up or down. That way, even with a 50 millimeter lens, I'm getting the proper body perspective, okay? But as you can see, you need a little bit of running room here to be able to do this. My circle that you're used to seeing is 10 feet in diameter. The background's all the way back here. So let's see, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. We're about 18, figure at least 20 feet of running room to be able to pull that off. So Madeline and anybody else that's interested, one of the first things to factor in if you're going to do full-length pictures of your subjects, if you want proper body proportions and you don't want to distort things, what have we determined? You're going to need at least about 20 feet of running room, and you're going to need a minimum of 8 feet height for a standing subject, right? And that's not going to leave you a lot of room for big dance moves, right? But, if you coordinate carefully, you could get away with some things, right? It's got to be well choreographed in order to do that. So what I want to do though is I want to switch lenses. So let's look at some of the variations, because normally when we're photographing people, especially for portraits, what do we usually try to do? When it's available, we try to work with a short or medium length telephoto lens, right? A little bit more compression. And we'll come back to that in a minute, and we'll go ahead and we'll also explore putting her closer to the background and some of the other things that will happen. But let's just look at the lens differences for the moment. So in this case, I went ahead and I switched to a 100mm lens, right? So let's go back. There it is with the 50. If you look above me, there it is with the 50. There it is with a 100mm. Now, for the 100mm, you notice I had to move the background back a little bit to keep her on the background. It's still set at 8 feet high, 8 feet wide, right? So she's pretty close here, and I haven't moved the height of the camera. We can tweak that in a moment, but I want you to look. Let me zoom out. Look at where the camera is, way back there. Let's take that picture. So now we're into the 30s of feet, right? A lot more running room is needed, and we can get away with bringing the camera up just a tiny bit higher, and that way we have her all in the backdrop. We still have good body proportions. You'll notice in the upper right hand corner we're starting to catch a little bit of light, so we may need to move that light back just a fraction. Minor tweak, not a big deal. We'll pop just a smidge more light in there. Boom. And we're good. So that solves that problem, but we need a lot more running room, right? Again, working with the dancer. If you have a higher than 8-foot ceiling, certainly you can take that background up higher if you're using like a seamless paper background, or if you're using a muslin background that's longer, but it means you're going to need quite a bit of background, right? And then the third option that I have set up here, let me switch over to that. We're going to discard that. Here, what I went ahead and did, still at 100mm, but I moved the background back in, right? So I actually put the background literally right behind her. But of course, what's the problem that we run into now? Now we have a situation where we've got shadow on the background. So it's not that that's bad, but it certainly kind of changes your options in terms of what you can do and what the feel the shot's going to be in the mood. So, you know, you need to be looking at all of these things. And just for the sake of it, let's go ahead and switch back to the 50mm lens, which, you know, as you can see now, that's like a behind the scenes shot. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move that way in, right, which we can do. It's tilted up just a little bit there, so let's kind of get to the middle. All right, that's pretty good. So we can make that work. So one of the options, you know, would potentially be to go ahead. In fact, let's switch this light to the other side where her face is, and we could make this a little bit more dramatic. Something like that. If we do that, now the shadow in the background isn't as, I hate to say obnoxious, but it's not as kind of annoying, if you will. Keep in mind, you can experiment a little bit with your background placement, okay? Coolly, you could, but that's not what the question was, right? The question was, what size backdrop? So that's what we're going through some variations here, okay? Sure, you could photograph the dancer in the street and do really cool stuff, okay? But we're dealing with backdrops. That was the question at hand. So I want you guys to watch what I'm going to do with a little bit of feathering of both the background and the key light, right? In fact, actually, for this version, we should also be moving the key light over to that side. Let's aim that back down her. I may actually take this, or excuse me, the rim light. I may take that rim light out altogether before it's all said and done with. But we'll see here. Yeah, we'll leave that there for the moment. But a couple things that we can do. What I want to do is I want to take the background and I'm going to rotate it a little bit, like so. Okay. Now, to the camera, the background is still all there. But if I rotate it a little bit, a couple things happen. And if I feather the light a little bit across the front, okay, now I have created unevenness without a distinct shadow. So obviously there's still shadow back there, but it's nowhere near as distinct. And she's still the same distance from the background, right? If I want to get a little bit fancier, I can even go ahead and aim that in, turn it up a little bit more, and we're gonna actually move it out here. And I can start to eliminate some of the shadow. So I want to show you these options because what you have to understand is that with lighting of any kind, it's all about problem solving, right? And the best part of it is light essentially travels in a straight line. So it's waves, we know that, right? But the net effect, it's a straight line. So with a little bit of experimenting, you can create lighting scenarios here that you're going to be able to minimize the impact of having to have your subject that close. Now, I also want to deal with a kind of an elephant in the room here. There are some people that will look at this and say, but her face is much brighter than her feet. So let's address that since we're talking about dancers for a minute. And this would apply to a family portrait. This is going to apply to any full-length picture. I am of the mentality, not saying that you have to be, I am of the mentality, I always want the face to be a little bit brighter than the feet. The only time that I am worried is the area from the knees down as bright as the rest of the picture. The only time I'm worried about that is if I'm doing a shot, maybe like a fashion picture where I've got to have a full head to toe outfit and I need to show the detail. Okay. Otherwise, I want that light to fall off a little bit because even for a dancer who's up on her toes, this is where the main action is. The main action is up top here, right? So, but if we need to see more of that and we need it to be more even, we can back this light up. We'll have to change our exposure ever so slightly. I'm going to go to 5.6, okay? And now I need to pull the power down just a tad since I maxed that out. Okay, by backing my light up, I can even out the light top to bottom. Notice how I also made the background brighter by doing that. So I hope you all notice that, right? By moving the key light further away from the subject. One more time, by moving the key light further away, I made the background brighter. That is the inverse square law. Okay. Obviously, I had to adjust the exposure to account for the distance from the main light to the subject, but the byproduct is making the background lighter than what it was. But the lighting is more even if that's important. And by the way, that's with a 33-inch modifier. I don't need a big 5, 6, 7, 8-foot modifier to have her evenly lit. And that modifier is still placed slightly above her head because you still want to have natural looking shadows under the chin. If I bring the modifier down lower, okay, now I'm starting to get almost no shadow, and I am starting to pick up, look at the shadows I'm picking up on the bridge of the nose up here. So I've got shadows in unnatural places. Even here on the leg, look at the shadow that's being created by bringing this light lower. We want the light higher, and that's going to soften that. It's still there, but it's softer, and that's what we want. Light comes from above, okay? So again, if I turn this one off, okay, there's what we're getting just with the one light. And then, by the way, the other option we have here, now that we've backed that light up, if I turn the background in the other direction, I'm going to get more shadow, but I can start to even it out. So there's a lot of variables that you can play with. And certainly if we have more lights available, we can start putting light on the background, you know, doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, if we want to add more color into this, we can turn that back on. Let's go ahead and give it, since she's wearing red, yeah, we'll go in the opposite direction. You know, we start throwing some blue, and we can do all kinds of fun stuff, you know, with color and stuff like that, which also kind of masks the shadow, right? But you still need a fair amount of running room. Again, remember, this is a 50 millimeter version. So let's kind of take this whole scenario now and let's go to portraiture, right? So I purposely went with a 4-foot wide background for the initial setup. So 2 lights like we had before. I've got a key light over here, a rim light on camera left, and this is a 50 millimeter lens, which is not ideal for shooting portraits. And you're going to kind of see why, right? So at this point, the camera is only about 5 feet away from her. So it's pretty close, okay? But you can see how much background it's taking in. So now, leaving the camera in the same spot, I'm not going to move the camera, but I'm going to switch to a 100 millimeter lens, or excuse me, an 85 millimeter lens, 85. Now I'm completely on the background because I have thinned out the angle of view, right? Or if I go a little bit further to such as like a 100 millimeter, even better yet. You know, for me, perfect scenario, I'm going to work with that 85 and I'm going to come in a lot closer like you're seeing there. Or if I want to use more space, I will back up, but work with a lens that's kind of in the 135 millimeter range and do it that way. Those are kind of my ideal focal lengths for portraits. So, but the point is for a portrait, you can work with a much thinner background and be able to do almost all the same things. Okay. Let's just see. And guys, again, if you have any questions, type away, or this may be a short show tonight. Okay, which I'd actually be okay with. I'm exhausted. I'll share some baseball pictures with you before we get offline because that's what I've been doing all week. I've been shooting baseball like nonstop, and I've got a weekend of baseball coming up both tomorrow and Sunday. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm having a blast. Mainly because these young 8-year-old baseball players, they are not the divas that most models are. So they're great. So anyway, so for portrait work again, you can get away with a much smaller work, but for dancers, Madeline, I will actually bring up Cooley's comment one more time. My advice to you is, if at all possible, try not to work on a backdrop and try to work in a more natural setting. So indeed, natural setting for dancer would either be to put them in a dance studio, because that's a place where we expect to see a dancer, or potentially, if you're able, do something creative where you are putting them in a scenario where certainly that's not really where you would expect to see a dancer at all. Like there's a guy, I think it's Omar Robles, if I got his name right. Hopefully I didn't mispronounce that. He's from New York. Photographs dancers, specifically a lot of ballet dancers, like all over New York City. He's got these brilliant images of dancers in all these different locations, and it's actually really cool, really artistic. And that may not work for exactly what you're doing, but the point is, if you're going to put a dancer on a background, bigger is better for the background. And certainly the more space you have to work with, the better. And then beyond the background conversation, I will point out too that if you're going to photograph dancers, and since you're talking about backdrops, this is obviously kind of a planned shoot that you're doing. It's really, really important to choreograph your shots for your sake. Meaning, and the dancer's sake too. Meaning, don't tell the dancer like, okay, well, you're really good, just go, and I'm gonna shoot as you go. That's a horrible idea, especially if you're shooting with strobes. As they're moving about, your exposure is changing. It's all over the place. Boom. Not to mention that you are going to run into the problem with, depending on where they're looking, the lighting's going to look great or the lighting's going to look like crap. So what you have to do is you have to work with the dancer, and you really have to plan each of the shots in the sense of, okay, what do we want the picture to be of you doing? So even if they're jumping, it's okay. So then you're going to work through, having them move from point A to point B, and then you need to figure out, so where are they going to be at the apex of their jump? Because at the apex of their jump, that's where all of their form is going to look its best, right? So that's the target that you're going to set for where are you going to aim your lights, how you're setting your light placement, how are you adjusting your exposures accordingly. If you just shoot it randomly, it's brutal. Trust me, from somebody who's been there, done that, that's not the way you want to shoot dancers. And I've worked with tons of dancers throughout my career. I love working with dancers. And part of the reason I love working with them is because I do have control. I can work through choreography with them so that I'm going to be able to do my shots in the specific spots that I want them and set my light accordingly so that I know that everything is going to look its absolute best. And then the other bonus of working with trained dancers, when you get your first shot, maybe the leg needs to come up further, or maybe the hand's up too high and it needs to come out more. Dancers have the body control that if you show them that, and this is one of the rare cases where I am an advocate for showing images. When I shoot portraits, when I shoot models, I don't show images. You've probably heard me talk about that before. But with dancers, yeah, it's great. You do your test shots, you show them the images because they're going to be able to make the adjustments immediately. It's like magic. And that's because of their training. So, you have to look at dancers very much as collaborators in the process, and you work through each of the ideas, and that's going to get you the better pictures. Okay. All right, so let me see here. Did I miss any questions? I don't think I did. Cool. All right, April. Using a handball court. Yeah, that would work. They'd probably give you plenty of room. Plus, you have some nice walls to work with there too. So let's see here. Let me bring up like the last 2 games that I shot with my grandson. And for those of you that may have grandkids or younger kids, or that you're going to go out and shoot some kids sports, I'll give you a little primer in how I do this, what my thought process is, how I go about doing it. And then we're going to go ahead and call it a night unless anybody comes up with another set of questions. So this is actually from last night's game that my grandson played in. So throughout the course of the season, I shoot pretty much all of his games. I make it to all but a small handful. And this particular season, he's 8 years old. He'll be 9 in October. He's playing on 2 different teams, an in-house team and a travel team. Tomorrow he's playing on a team called the Rising All-Stars, which is kind of a big honor within his league. They're the kids that are the best of the best at the level he's at. And they're going to play a team from the next level up. And then at the end of the season, he doesn't know it yet, but he's also going to be playing on the All-Star team for this league. So this kid puts a lot of effort into baseball. So a couple of things that I do. Let's talk about some of the logistics. So at 8 years old, they are still on a smaller size field, which is great because number one, you don't need super, super long telephoto lenses and you're not shooting from a mile away. And as long as you pay attention and you understand the game, and plus if you get to know the coaches and that kind of stuff, you can go wherever you want, whenever you want. And that's exactly what I do. In fact, last night was a perfect example where a lot of the pictures I took, I was standing in center field while the game was happening. Okay. So obviously I had to pay attention. I had to make sure that I didn't get between a player and a ball or, any of that kind of stuff. But because I know the team really well, and the only time I'm in center field is when his team is hitting. So by now we're like 5 or 6 games into the season. I know these kids well. I know who's likely to hit where and who can actually hit the ball that far. So, I'm able to make sure that I'm never in the way, but I get great access. I go to the games with 2 camera bodies, both A7 IVs, which, by the way, are not great sports cameras. But you'll see what I'm able to do with these cameras. It took a little bit of practice, okay? The reason why I say they're not great sports cameras is because the viewfinders, the EVFs, there's a considerable amount of lag compared to real time. So you do a shot and it's kind of one of those things like if you see the ball hit the bat, it's almost like back in the film days with the DSLR. When you were shooting with the DSLR, because of the mirror, if you saw the ball hit the bat, that meant that you didn't get the picture, right? So it was always kind of weird. Like the picture that you wanted, if you saw it, you didn't shoot it because the only way you could have shot it is if the mirror's up. And if the mirror's up, you can't see it, right? So I kind of back to working almost like it's with a DSLR in the sense that if I'm looking through the EVF, if I see the ball where I want the ball, I've missed the picture. The ball has actually already gone by. So there's processing time. And it's not like seconds, but it's long enough that if I react to seeing the ball in the viewfinder, I've missed the shot. So when I'm shooting, I'm watching the kids' faces. Everything I'm doing, it's about the kids' faces, because the kids' faces and their body language tells me exactly where the ball is, how close it's getting. Because especially with little kids, their eyes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger as that ball's getting close to them. So it's really a matter of paying attention to body language. So I do most of my shots with the Tamron 150 to 500. It's a 5.6 to 6.7 lens on the Sony a7 IV. And then my second a7 IV body usually has either the 17 to 28. One game, I took the 28 to 75 on that, but it's the 17 to 28. And I do a couple shots each game. So I make it a point when I get to the games, I get there about 15 minutes early while the kids are still warming up. And so there's a point where they'll just be tossing the ball back and forth, right? Having to catch, warming up. So that's a great time to actually get close-up shots of, him catching a ball and throwing a ball, right? So this game last night was a makeup game for a rain out. They were playing in a park, so they weren't on their regular set of ball fields. So that did make it a little bit challenging with the backgrounds, because in fact there's a soccer goal sitting in right field, that kind of stuff. So I had to be a little bit extra careful with the backgrounds. But the good news is when they were batting, it was actually a nicer background than I get at their normal fields. So these are shots just, these are done before the game. Then when they're batting, so here's a great example. I'm out in the outfield. I'm working at about 377 millimeters, okay, is the focal distance, and shooting in towards home plate, right? And so obviously at this age, it's all about the eyes and it's all about the ball, right? Any of this action, you've got to see the face, right? Because the face is what tells the story. You got the umpire watching the strike come in. You got my grandson trying to hit the ball. You got the catcher, doesn't even have his glove open up yet because he knows that ball's coming in fast and he's afraid he's going to get hit, which is how most 8-year-old catchers are, okay? And then, after he does make a hit, it's a matter of, following him down to first base. And again, I want action. Anytime I can catch him in between strides, that's perfect because I'm going to get him in midair. This one was important. The first baseman dropped the ball, so he's picking the ball up, looking towards first base. So it tells the whole story. We did have an injury last night. His game got off to a bit of a rough start. We had some tears, but he toughed it out, got back in. So next at bat, again, shooting from the outfield. There we got the catcher with both eyes open. He changed, the catcher changed gloves. That's why the catcher was feeling more confident. He went with a glove that he could actually work. At 8 years old, they have a hard time manipulating a regular glove. So again, it's all about the details. Then, he got a particularly good hit. So then it's a matter of, following down first baseline, getting ready for him to turn the corner. And again, catching in between strides whenever possible. I want him in midair. And then he's making that wide turn to go to second base. And by the way, none of this stuff is spray and pray. All these batting pictures, this is usually like 2 frames at a pop. 2 frames. That's it. 2 frames, 2 frames. That's all it is. So it is about learning the timing with your camera, and it's about paying attention, okay? So later in the game, he was catching. So this is now my grandson behind the plate. So now I'm less interested in the batter, and I'm more interested in him, his reactions, things that he's doing, that kind of stuff, right? So anytime there's wild pitches and you can kind of get the chaos, that's what you want. But again, got to have that ball. Ball's got to be in the picture. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of kids flailing around, right? So again, there he is still behind the plate, more behind the plate. If I can get the pitcher in frame too, now I've got the whole story. I've got the pitcher, the catcher, the umpire, the batter, all the pieces are there, okay? Now it's him hitting again, same thing. And throughout the season, I'll work through different locations. So this is a shot, he's on first base. I'm in the outfield. I'm standing over in left field, shooting across the field. So I've got one of his teammates on second base, right? He's on first base, kid hits the ball, so they're about to take off running, okay? This is him playing first base later in the game. That's him stretching because his knee hurt from the injury. Him running between bases. coming home for a run. And then every now and then I'll even do, well, okay, so this was actually a kind of a nice shot towards the end of the game where the sun had part of the field in shade. And every now and then I will go in with wider lenses to shoot the prime action. Not so much for faces, because obviously, as much as I talked about faces, there's no faces in this shot, right? But to give a sense of place. Because one of the things that I do at the end of the season, one of his Christmas presents, I put together a book of his baseball season, of all the best pictures from his baseball season. So part of it is I want shots that kind of set the scene. Other important things, I'll go back one more game here. Other important things that I do, these are kids. So I'm walking around a baseball field with a super big lens, right, on a monopod, because that sucker's heavy, and another camera on my shoulder. And I want to be able to come and go as I please and go wherever. So fortunately, my grandson plays at a very, very well organized Little League group, but I set up a web page for each of these teams. And in fact, actually here, I can show you. Let me switch back for a second, because this is something that a lot of you, I would encourage you to do this if you find yourself in this situation, right? So this is a scenario where, I'm there, I'm taking the pictures anyway for my grandson. And I want to make sure that they don't see me as a nuisance. I want to make sure that I have, great access as all this is happening. So what I have done, and you guys have heard me talk about Slick Pick before, okay? Let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger on the screen, and I'll go back. I have a web page set up for these kids. I have the coach share the link after like the first or second game. There's a note to the parents, and the note to the parents is basically saying, hey, if you see me walking around your kid's game with a camera, I'm, Joey's grandfather, and here's the pictures. They can click on the pictures and they can download the full res images. I give them to them for free. This way, every parent is like, go for it. Take as many pictures as you want, knock yourself out. So that way, if one of their kids is in a picture with my grandson, I don't have a situation where anybody's complaining. If there's an image that I want to use for anything with my marketing or that, and it's got one of these kids in it, it creates a relationship where all I have to do is send a message to that parent or ask them at a game, say, hey, do you mind if I use that picture? I'm like, oh, go right ahead. Knock yourself out. Boom. Never had a problem. I give the league access to all these. So every team that he's on, I create one of these pages. And all it is a matter at the end of the night, I just process the, of a game, I process the images, load them up here. And then the parents know, they go and they check them out because they get the email throughout the season. I keep adding. I even provide them a downloadable printing release so that they're all full res files. If they want to go get prints made, they can do that. I don't want to get in the middle of that. So I'm not saying you have to take it quite that far. Depending on your league, depending on their structure, they may be absolutely fine with you selling, prints of the files. If you're going to do that, I would encourage you to check with the league first, okay? Because you run into a situation there where they may tell you, hey, we want a percentage of that. Rightfully so, by the way. But so I that's kind of the setup that I go through in order to be able to really just, have the access. So again, it's kind of the same thing. Before a game, I'm taking pictures while he's warming up. I'll do pictures in the dugouts. And again, I shoot stuff like this of all the kids, right? And then during the game, it's game action. Running down bases, again, anytime I get them in the air, that's always awesome. Balls in the air, multiple kids go. And this was a particularly good game in the sense that he was playing third base this game. Him and the kid that were playing shortstop, they kept tripping each other up and getting into each other's way. So there was lots of chaos going on, which was great. Batting pictures, this time not from the outfield, but from along the first base line. Okay. And basically what I'm doing here, there's the hit, and I'm still in the same spot. I haven't moved. I'm shooting him coming down the first baseline. So I'm zooming out as he's getting closer. He did a little bit of pitching this night. So the point being, there's a lot of thought process behind doing that kind of stuff. But the key to shooting sports in general, number one, is know the game. Number two, research your locations so you know what your best angles are. And they're going to vary depending on the lighting, the time of year, all that kind of stuff. But number three, the important piece of everything I just told you, it applies to anything you're going to do. If you're going to go photograph an event, photograph a wedding, it doesn't matter what you're going to photograph, right? Do as much research as you can in advance. Learn as much as you can about it and about where you're going. And that way you have the ability to kind of pick your angles. Because hopefully one of the things you notice about, most of these shots is that I keep the backgrounds as clean as possible. And even when it's a situation where, I've got a dugout in the background and there's really no way for me to photograph him other than that. Because if I would have gone out onto the field on this field, there is a chain link fence with a big trash can sitting right behind home plate, right? So it doesn't make for a great backdrop. So, again, it's keeping the backgrounds as non-distracting as possible, always making sure there's faces. It happened to be my younger grandson's birthday that day, so they were having a birthday party for him. So again, a little bit of planning, a little bit of effort, and a little bit of relationship building. And people will let you, at this level, especially, people will let you go almost anywhere and shoot almost anything in any way. And that's really the key. If you're going to photograph people in any way, shape, or form, it's a relationship business. So don't ever forget that. So that's been my week, is shooting a lot of baseball this week. That's going to be my weekend. I'll be shooting a bunch of baseball this weekend. I don't see any other questions in here. So I am going to thank you all for coming out. I am going to go and enjoy a couple of extra minutes with my wife this evening. But hopefully, since it is the weekend coming up, all of you, you're going to get out there. You're going to do some shooting, do some practice. And you know what? Even if you can't get out, pick up that camera for a little while and work with it. Maybe spend some time through the manuals. For most of us, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, warm weather, summertime's coming. It's the time to get out there with your cameras. There's lots to shoot. So it's time to practice and time to make it a priority. Okay? So remember, you've got less time ahead of you than you did yesterday. So seriously, pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios, gang. Thanks for stopping by. Have a great weekend.